grade 9 students. I am Miss Alexander, your social studies teacher. Welcome to lesson 7. Today we are starting a new topic, health and well-being. And to start us off, we are looking at the subtopic, domestic violence. In the previous lesson, we learned that women have a constitutional right for their participation in various management and decision-making processes in both public and private sector, and that it would be encouraged and facilitated by laws enacted for that purpose and otherwise. We also learned that respect for women is initiated at the national level through several initiatives to improve access to social protection for women and girls. At the same time, it is an individual responsibility to treat women respectfully. In the previous lesson, we had a takeaway activity titled Safety for All Women. It was based on preparing a campaign after examining or observing how women are treated within their community and encouraging all community members to have respect for women. I trust that those of you who were in that lesson applied your knowledge from the session and exercised your creative muscles as you plan for that community outreach. Now let's transition to today's lesson. In this lesson, you will be given takeaway activities, just the way I did in the previous lesson. It may require you to work independently, or it may require you to seek assistance from someone or perhaps an institution within your community or your village. Now, these activities are aimed to help you have a better understanding of the concepts and apply the topic to our society. Now, let's talk about today's session. What are our objectives? From today's lesson, you should be able to explain the concept domestic violence. You should be able to state the forms of domestic violence, give reasons for the occurrence of domestic violence, explain the effects of domestic violence, and identify problems or troubles that result in abuse and violence between members of the same family or household. So let's begin by understanding what is domestic violence. Domestic violence, also known as domestic abuse or intimate partner violence, can be defined as a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner or over a family member. Victims of domestic abuse can include a child, other relatives, or any other household member. Domestic violence can happen to anyone of any faith, age, sexual orientation, religion, gender, of all socio-economic backgrounds and educational levels. Now let's look at forms of domestic violence. Can you identify forms of domestic violence? Now I know this term is not a new term to some of you, so you can think about it. Perhaps you might have made observations in your community, or you might have previously had a similar discussion with a teacher. All right, good job. Now here are a few for us to consider. First, physical abuse. Physical abuse involves hurting or trying to hurt a partner by hitting, kicking, burning, grabbing, pinching, shoving, slapping, hair pulling, biting, beating, denying medical care, or forcing alcohol and/or drug use, or using other physical force. So that's one form of domestic violence. Let's look at the second form, emotional abuse. Emotional abuse includes undermining a person's sense of self-worth through constant criticism, belittling one's abilities, name calling or other verbal abuse, damaging a partner's relationship with their child or children, or not letting a partner see friends and family members. The third form of domestic violence is psychological or mental abuse. This includes actions or threats of actions that influences another person. These include any behaviors that ridicule, frighten, intimidate, terrorize, manipulate, hurt, humiliate, blame, injure, or wound someone. The fourth form of domestic violence is sexual abuse. This involves having sexual intercourse with an individual without their consent. Rape and incest are examples of such. Also, showing a child pornographic videos and photos are forms of sexual abuse. The fifth form of domestic violence is social abuse. This involves rejecting others. The sixth form of domestic violence is economic or financial abuse. This involves making or attempting to make a person financially dependent by maintaining total control over their financial resources, withholding access to money, and or forbidding attendance at school or their form of employment. The seventh form of domestic violence is stalking. Stalking involves any pattern of behavior that serves no legitimate purpose and is intended to harass, annoy, or terrorize the victim. Typical stalking activities include repeated phone calls, unwelcoming letters or gifts by mail, surveillance at work, home, or other places that the victim is known to frequent. So now that we would have established some of the forms of domestic violence, let's now move on to looking at reasons for domestic violence. There are many reasons to suggest why an individual abuses their partner or family member. Some reasons include 1. Abusers feel they have low self-esteem, are extremely jealous, have difficulties with regulating their anger or other strong emotions, or when they feel inferior to the other partner in education and economic background. 2. Traditional beliefs. Some people think they have the right to control their partner and that women aren't equal to men. A third reason for domestic violence may be an undiagnosed personality disorder or psychological disorder in the abuser. A fourth reason is socialization. Some persons learned abuse or violent behaviors from growing up in a household where domestic violence was accepted as a normal part of being raised in their family. So now we would have covered some of the reasons for domestic violence, and now we will move into signs of domestic violence. How can you identify if or when someone is being abused? Can you identify it? There are many signs of abuse one may observe. You should know too that some signs are more obvious than others. Also, be very careful when identifying and talking about abusive signs and labeling actions as abusive when in fact they may not be so. So make your observation, and if you can, inquire before moving forward. So here are a few signs. Number 1, the abuser bullies, threatens, or controls their partner. For example, they accuse their partner of having an affair, blame them for the abuse, or even threatens to kill the partner or someone close to them. Secondly, abuser controls their money. For example, keeps money away from them, would not let the partner have money for basic needs like food and clothing, and even to attend school and work like we mentioned before. The abuser may also keep the partner from working whatever job they want. The third sign is that the abuser cuts their partner or the family member off from other family members and their friends. This is done by keeping close tabs on where they go and with whom they go, and embarrass them in front of others and make them want to avoid people. Fourthly, signs that an individual is being sexually abused are when they are forced to have sex, the abuser makes them dress in sexual ways, and the abuser makes them feel like they owe them sex. The fifth sign of domestic violence is physical abuse, which includes being abandoned in a place they do not know, being attacked with weapons, and being locked in their own home, or perhaps being locked out of their own home as well. Let's move on to looking at problems or troubles that result in abuse and violence between members of the same family or household. 1. Family members make excuses for their violence. For example, they will blame alcohol or some other type of drug that they may be consuming, or stress, or something else. But the essential point is that they never recognize themselves as the true source of the problem. They play the blame game. The second point is that family members believe that they have the right to behave in whatever way they choose while in their own home. The third point is that family members don't take responsibility for their behavior and prefer to think that loved ones or a particular circumstance provoked their behavior. A fourth point is the belief that men are entitled to sex from their partners. Now, let's move on to the other topic area, effects of domestic violence. Domestic violence causes significant long-term harm to its victims, and it is costly to the community and the nation at large. So let's take a look at some of the effects. 1. Domestic abuse may culminate in serious physical injury, mental health, suicide, and death. These effects eventually affect the available human resource within a given society. The second effect is sexual and reproductive health. Some victims are affected with sexually transmitted diseases such as gonorrhea, syphilis, hepatitis A and B. A third effect is violence during pregnancy. Number 5, losing ownership to property such as land, vehicle, anything that a victim may own. The sixth effect is entrenched poverty. And you will appreciate that this may indeed be the case because if a victim is unable to work, then it may lead them into poverty. Number 7, inherited grief and trauma. And number 8, the loss of traditional male and female role models. Let's now wrap up today's session. We learned quite a lot, and we really want to put certain things in perspective and ensure that we have a clear understanding of what we're taking away from today's session. We established that domestic abuse or domestic violence is also referred to as intimate partner violence. So anytime you may hear any of those terms being used, it's related to the same phenomenon. The second point is that domestic abuse is a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner or a family member. The third point we want to take away from today is that Victims of domestic violence include an intimate partner or spouse, a child or any other relative, or anyone who occupies that household. The fourth point that we should be taking away is forms of domestic violence include physical, economic, sexual, and psychological. You will recognize that these are just a few that we are mentioning right now, but we would have mentioned more in the lesson. The fifth point that we want to take away from today is that traditional beliefs, socialization, and the abuser's sense of self are some reasons for domestic violence. A sixth point that we can take away from today's lesson is that one problem that may result from domestic violence is that family members don't take responsibility for their behavior and prefer to think that their loved ones or the circumstances provoked their behavior. The seventh point that we can take away from today's lesson is that effects of domestic violence include inherited grief and trauma, physical injury, mental health, poverty, and can even lead to death. Well, students, this has brought us to the end of today's lesson. There is so much that we will continue to learn about our health and well-being, particularly when it comes to domestic violence, and we're going to look more into this topic in the next lesson. So until then, see you in the next lesson.